We're running. Clap.
Good to go?
I think so. Just looking at the framing. I feel like I need to just move the camera a tiny bit in my direction.
Hä?
Did you get that? I'm so confused.
Also, ich verstehe nur Bahnhof. You only understand train station? It's all Greek to me.
Understanding Train Station. Living between cultures with Josh and Faylee.
Welcome back to another episode of Understanding Train Station, everyone. My name is Josh.
My name's Faylee, and as you can see, we're together in person, which is
We're
awesome.
still here.
Doesn't happen a lot anymore these days.
It doesn't. I mean, I feel like whenever you're in Munich or I'm here, we try to take advantage of the time as much as possible to try to get as many episodes in person recorded, because we both enjoy it more that way too.
Yeah, but usually I think 2 episodes is like the maximum that we get in during
Exactly.
that
I
time.
mean, it's tricky because normally when we're here or I'm in Cincinnati or you're in Munich, we have a lot on our schedule.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm pretty proud of ourselves for being able to even record 2.
Yeah, same.
Given the circumstances.
Good job, us.
Yes. A little self-praise is never a bad thing, I suppose.
Yeah, and we need to keep this episode kind of short, which, of course, for Understanding Train Station standards means that it's maybe going to be an hour or so.
I was going to say, I feel like
short.
our goal should be a half hour, but we're probably going to end up more than an hour as usual.
But the reason is that today that we're recording is actually St. Patrick's Day, which is kind of a big holiday in the U.S. You'll see a lot of decorations, a lot of green, and a lot of parties or people at bars.
Yeah.
It's a big, like, drinking holiday.
For sure, for sure. I mean, the Irish population makes up a huge percentage of American immigrants.
Yeah, like
So-
Irish ancestry.
Yes,
that is.
yes,
Not people
exactly.
who were actually born in Ireland and have an Irish passport, but more. I think we've talked about that
Yeah,
before.
the ethnic makeup of the United States
Yeah.
is very Irish heavy.
Yeah.
So it's a huge thing that people tend to celebrate here. I'm being bad right now and not wearing my green, but I have I have a green necklace that I'll be wearing and I've been wearing today. But yeah, so we're celebrating St. Patrick's Day today.
And also your last night in Cincinnati.
And it is my last night in Cincinnati before flying back to Germany,
Yeah.
which I'm looking forward to. But you always, I feel like we don't have a good saying in English for this, but I always go with one crying eye.
Mit einem weinenden Auge.
Yeah, exactly. We wouldn't say that in English, I think, but
Isn't there a saying though? No, there's a love-hate relationship, but that's not what this is. Yeah, I guess.
I feel like we do have a saying.
Bittersweet.
Yeah, it's bittersweet.
Yeah.
But I like the
Mit
German
einem, yeah.
one crying eye, not both crying eyes, one crying eye. So, but yes, I fly back tomorrow, which
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of looking forward to the journey because it's only one layover again.
Yeah,
so
again.
it'll be easier that way.
Nice. So is it Atlanta and then?
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. So I fly via Atlanta and then I arrive. That's the thing. It's so nice if you can get the short leg at the beginning of your trip. And then once you get off of the plane from the long leg of the trip,
You're there.
You're there.
Yeah, that is nice.
On the coming back here, it wasn't that case. It was the long leg first.
Yeah.
And it's so nice just to be able to get off the plane and just go straight home.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
The worst thing is when you fly over to Germany, which like usually means kind of depends on the schedule, but usually you kind of arrive in the morning or like noon or like earlier in the day.
Yeah.
And what I find the worst is when you arrive there around like 8 a.m. and then you have another flight.
Yeah.
So you have to hang out at an airport for a few hours. And you're tired and it's the morning and people look kind of fresh, but you feel like shit because you've been on a plane
Exactly.
forever.
All oily
Yeah,
and
yeah.
greasy.
Like, that's
Yeah.
the worst feeling, I feel like. Coming back to the US, I feel like is always nice because
It's just
even
one
though
really long day.
yeah, but usually you do have the second flight within the US, so
Mm-hmm.
that's sometimes annoying. But at least I usually arrive here at night, so then you get here and it's time for bed anyway.
Exactly.
So that's
You
kind
eat
of
dinner
nice.
and then you're
Yeah,
out 100%. But no, one thing that's been interesting, I mean, this trip and every trip it happens, I suppose, but just realizing how monolingual the United States is.
Yeah.
Just being surrounded by people who are only speaking English. At least in Munich, you're surrounded by other languages all the time.
And especially you and your VG.
Yes,
'cause
where I live and
yeah.
also like my VG, but also the general area. It's around a university, so there are lots of international people constantly.
Yeah.
And then to come back here and it just be English. On the one hand, it's nice. I'm not necessarily complaining about it, but it definitely was a change. And now I'm noticing, especially now that we've been hanging out a couple of times, like I have to get back into the swing of things with German.
Yeah.
It hasn't been easy. We were just talking before recording, and like it's weird. It's the words just didn't come as fast, or like I was mumbling. It was, so that's something that I need to work on before going back. So I'll have to watch some movies or something on the plane in German to get me all set up for it.
Yeah, or you just check out some Chatterbug Shorts, which is today's sponsor. You may have heard me talk about Chatterbug streams before on my YouTube or my Instagram on Feli from Germany. We're very happy that we also get to collaborate with them here on Understanding Train Station.
Very much so.
Chatterbug streams, like traditionally, is this app where you can watch live streams on topics by native speakers. You can also watch them as videos on demand afterwards. You don't have to be there at the time that it's scheduled for. But it's a really cool concept because these native speakers prepare like a little, it's not really a lesson. It's more like they prepare a topic and they talk about, they share information with you, but they also interact with the viewers because as like you would expect it from a regular live stream, there's like a chat function.
That's so cool.
And like you can like things and it'll pop up on the side. And I've done a few of those. I've watched a few in German, which obviously I understand everything in German, but I've also done a few in French, and I was very surprised how much I understood. I understood pretty much everything of the couple ones that I did. And I was also very surprised that everyone actually communicated in the chat in the target language, so in French, even though people were learners.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I watched a live stream on raclette. This was shortly after New Year's Eve, I think. Yeah. So
cool.
She made raclette on the live stream, which was super cool.
That's awesome.
She explained to people how that works, and it was completely in French. So there was no English there whatsoever, and there was no written, there was no notes on the screen. There's only the slides that she prepares. They pop up underneath, so you can see a little bit of the written word, but it's really good for improving your understanding of the language, your listening skills, and your just overall comprehension skills of getting the message, even if you don't understand every single word, which is really what you have to do in everyday life if you're exposed to the language. You'll never understand every single word. You have to understand it kind of out of context.
Exactly.
Maybe guess a few things. Maybe combine her gestures with the words that you understand. So yeah, it's a great way of getting exposure to real life language.
And I think one thing that's really cool about it too is you were saying that people are conversing in the languages in the chat too, because I feel like that's such an important aspect of learning a language, is not just the listening, but it's also about participating in the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's really cool that they have that feature as well, where you can interact with other students or other people participating in the chat. So yeah, it's a really great feature. That's really cool.
Yeah, and also of course during times of still COVID and everything, it's kind of this cool feeling if you actually do watch it live. You know that these other people are watching it live with you at the same time. It's kind of like a feeling of community. And there's also quizzes, so also another feature of interaction where it'll be a question about what the person had just talked about with different answer, different choices, all also in the target language, and you get to see do I understand the question? Did I understand what they were talking about? So yeah, that is a really cool feature, and now they have these Chatterbug Shorts, which, if you know Instagram Reels, for example, or TikToks, you know the concept of these shorter kind of videos where you can just scroll through. They're maybe a minute long. And they have those now also as language learning clips. So you really don't even need to spend the 10 or 15 minutes that one of those streams would be. If you don't have it, you can just do this anytime, anywhere, if you're in the bathroom or you waiting at the airport tomorrow or something. Just scroll through, and that might be a nice way for you too to maybe get back into German a little bit.
One thing that I think is really cool about these shorts, and I've noticed it for myself, is you can pick up little bits and pieces of a language, and sometimes I feel like that's the best way to learn, is not overwhelm yourself with thinking I have to become fluent, but just in these tiny little few moments that you have just to learn these few little tidbits, and it adds over time. So I think it's a really cool feature that you guys should definitely take advantage of.
All right, let's begin your German lesson. Okay, I'm ready. First word, ich. That's a new sound. Ich. No, not ish. Ich. Ich. Try again. Ich. I'm hearing it. I'm hearing what you're doing, and then I am not. I'm not doing that. Ich. Well done. Let's move on to the next word. Whew, okay, can't get much harder than that. Eichhörnchen. Why?
Yeah, and it really teaches you about like colloquial language and, like cultural situations kind of, which is something that you don't always get in a textbook or something like that. And as I said, they do have it in German, but they also have French, as I also just mentioned, Spanish and English. And the best thing about this is that the app is completely free. All you have to do is just download it, and you can do that through our tracking link. If you just look in the YouTube info box or the show notes of the podcast, that helps us if you download it through that link. So download Chatterbug and check out the streams and the shorts and learn a little bit of everyday language.
So now kind of moving into the main topic of this episode, I'm interested to see how you would describe the main topic of this episode, but I think the best way to describe it is finances.
Yeah, probably. I was like, money, banking, debt, finances.
Which first of all, the word finance I think is interesting because a lot of people, at least I know on the East Coast of the U.S., say finance, which I just think is weird.
I did not know that.
Some people say finance.
Okay, interesting. Is that the British pronunciation?
I don't know, but I would say
didn't
finance.
think so.
But a lot of people say finance.
Really?
There's another weird word, and now we're getting. This is going to be a long episode. Harass versus harass, or harass versus harassment.
Okay.
Or harassment versus.
I mean,
harassment.
I would obviously say harassment and harass. I did not know that people pronounce it the other way.
Yeah. Let us know if that's a true East Coast thing, but it's definitely something that I know people say.
And also, where does that come from? Because I know, for example, with like privet and private, that's like British versus American, or garage versus garage, those kinds of things. But like, I did not know those two examples that you just said. Yeah. And that's interesting that people within the U.S. do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I had American professors who would say finance.
I wonder if that makes it like sound a little bit more fancy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say it just like you said, kind of zhuzh it up and make it feel fancier.
What did you say? Zhuzh it up?
Zhuzh it up. Yeah.
Don't
ask me how to spell zhuzh, but that's what people say, like to zhuzh something up.
Okay, I'm learning so much today. The one thing that I have heard before, like there's a few between northern U.S. versus southern, is like, for example, I think we talked about this, theater versus theater.
Yeah,
I think we had a few other examples where we talked about different accents within the U.S. But no, I was not aware of that, so that's interesting. But yeah, finances.
Exactly.
Or finances is our
and
topic.
I feel like there are some pretty significant differences between the way that Americans go about their financial health or their financial matters compared to Germans. So I think we have some interesting topics that we're going to be able to jump in.
Yeah, 100%.
Jump into this episode. And I'm looking forward to it because I feel like even before I moved to Germany, there were some aspects of the German approach to finances that I tried to adopt here as far as I used a lot of cash.
Oh, did you?
Well, that's not true. What am I saying? No, I used credit cards, but I don't know. I just feel like I was much more conservative in my approach, which I think is more the German approach to finances compared to the American, which is a little bit more frivolous. And these are obviously, like every episode that we talk about, stereotypes and
generalizations.
Yeah, these are
apply to everyone.
Exactly. Just our general statements that we always say. But yeah, I feel like I was much more German in my mindset towards finances before moving, and I think then sometimes I can be a bit more American in certain things.
I think we did talk about especially the cash versus credit card part in, I want to say, our second episode ever about Adulting 2.0. I think it was that episode where we like already talked a little bit about the everyday differences, where like how credit cards aren't as common in Germany and things like that.
But I think this is going to be a bit more of a personal, like how the German and American public tend to view their own finances as opposed to, or handle their own finances as opposed to how the culture, how they interact with exchanging money.
But also now you've lived in Germany for over a year. So back then you had lived in Germany for short periods of time, but I think now you actually can give us a different insight into the topic from your point of view. I wrote down a few different like categories that I kind of want to touch on. And I mean, this what we just mentioned is the first one. Cash is king is what I wrote down. So just to like repeat that, in Germany, it's just very common to use cash. A lot of people have cash on them at all times. And even though it's definitely becoming more common to pay with cards or like Apple Pay or electronic forms of payment in Germany too, especially because of the pandemic as well, you should still always have cash on you in Germany because
Yeah.
there might always be situations where you need to pay something in cash or like you want to get something from a little kiosk or bakery and they don't accept cards, or even restaurants. It's still
Yeah.
pretty common that restaurants either don't accept cards at all or they have a minimum payment
Yeah.
requirement where it's like only over 10 euros or 20 euros or something.
Yeah, I was
They-
really surprised recently. I had a couple experiences at restaurants where I couldn't pay with a credit card
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
Like, at all. Even if we combined everything that we ate at the table,
Yeah.
still no.
I went to one in, I think it was over Christmas. I don't remember which one it was. But I remember that even, like, I was with a German friend, and Ben was there too. And even my German friend was surprised. And I was like, well, I guess that's still a thing. Like, some restaurants
Yeah.
just don't offer card payments. And they don't tell you before either.
No. And I also recently bought a gift card, and it was 50 euros, and I wasn't allowed to pay for it with a credit card. I had to pay cash, which was just super weird.
Yeah.
One thing on the whole credit card thing, though, I feel like even though oftentimes in Germany you have to pay with cash, if you do pay with credit card, I feel like the credit card technology is more advanced in Germany than it is here in the U.S.
What do you mean by that?
As far as the servers bringing the credit card machine to you at the table, it
True.
all being more mobile. And then secondly, also contactless. I feel like contactless
It's definitely
is...
becoming more common in the U.S. too.
It
A couple
is.
of my cards are contactless now too, and it
But not necessarily, the card itself in the U.S. is contactless, but as far as the places where you can
Yeah.
use it, it's much, much
Yeah.
less, I feel like.
No, I was just gonna say that has become more common as well, but doesn't work everywhere. Like I think at Kroger, for example, they
Exactly.
don't offer that, which is a very big grocery store.
So that's been one interesting observation
Yeah.
that I've had recently. Like, I've gone to, like, just tap my card, and I'm like, oh, wait. Okay, no, I have to actually insert it.
Yeah, which is kind of like the big part about the whole COVID thing too, where the point was that you don't maybe necessarily have to touch that device.
Exactly.
You just like take your own card that you've only touched, tap into the thing, which like if you have to actually insert it and press your PIN numbers, it might not even make that big of a difference anymore.
Exactly.
But yeah, also when we talk about credit card, I feel like let's just maybe talk about card in general, because
Yeah.
in Germany, a lot of people don't own a credit card at all. So in that case, it would just be debit card, which I feel like here people kind of use those terms interchangeably in
Yeah.
a lot of cases because it really doesn't matter if it's a debit card or a credit card, which for understanding, it's kind of complicated because I think technically it's EC-Karte in Germany, which is like the most common like bank card that is connected to your bank account, isn't actually a real debit card because it's not connected to like Visa or MasterCard or like one of those
Credit card companies.
companies. Yeah. I think that's the definition of a debit card. Whereas in the US, I feel like your bank card is usually a debit card
Yeah.
that also has like a Visa or something sign on it. But also, that's the next point on my list. Most people in the US have at least one or several credit cards because
Exactly.
that is a big part of the culture here. In Germany, I did own one credit card before I moved to the US. I got a second German credit card when I did my exchange semester here because I was told that it's like safe to have a second one in case your first one gets lost or something. But some people get a credit card in Germany for online shopping.
Yeah.
But besides that, like most young people I know do not have a credit card. It's just not a big thing there.
Yeah, whereas here in the U.S., it's kind of conventional wisdom that
Mm-hmm.
you're taught, like, you need to get a credit card early to build credit, to build your credit score that you will need throughout your life. So I know for me, I think I got my first credit card when I was like 18, 19.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, my bank had like a secure card where you put an amount of cash
Yeah.
into the bank and that you couldn't touch as collateral. And then your limit was as much as cash that you
So
had
it's
in the
almost
bank.
like a prepaid card.
It is, but
Yeah.
it's technically a credit card.
Yeah.
But
I had one of those in Germany as well.
but it's
yeah.
very safe because you can never, if you can't, you'll never mess up your credit score because you can just use that money that you have in the bank to
so
pay
you,
it off.
You can't
Overspend.
Yeah, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And the whole credit score thing is a big topic. Let's just, I guess, get into that. We can maybe at the end be like, hey, what did we forget to mention? Because I'm sure we're going to forget things
Yeah.
here and there. But the whole credit score thing is such a huge deal in the US. And this is kind of one of the main things that I wanted to talk
Yeah.
about today. Basically, this whole people being in debt, how important your credit score is in the US, and what is that even?
Yeah.
actually, maybe backing up a second, let's really briefly explain the difference between a credit card and a debit card. Because as I said, some Germans might not even know the difference because we kind of use those terms almost interchangeably sometimes. So, I mean, a debit card or your EC-Karte, your bank card, is just directly connected to your bank account. So if you pay with that, the money will just be withdrawn from your account.
Exactly.
A credit card, technically, you go in debt with the credit institution, with the bank, meaning that the money will not be pulled from your account directly, but it'll be on your credit card. So you're taking a credit, basically. You're getting some credit, and then you pay that credit card off, which, like, when I had a credit card in Germany, I would just do that right away. So it wouldn't even make a difference to me. It was just like I would pay with my credit card, and then I would go into my credit card app or banking account or whatever, and then you just initiate that the bill that you have on that credit card statement is being paid with the money from your bank account. Now, in the US, a lot of people actually use credit cards for credit, for loans, basically, to borrow money because they need money that they don't have right now.
Exactly. And I just wanted to touch a little bit more on the credit card aspect of things of when you sign up for a credit card, the financial institution does a review of your history, which is getting into the topic of credit score. And based off of this review, they set a limit for you. A limit meaning how much credit they're going to give you. So if you have a really good history, you could have a very high limit. So you can end up spending a lot of money. And what happens oftentimes, like you were saying, Feli, is people who don't have the money that they need at the moment, rather than saving or going into some other sort of financial deal, finding credit somewhere else, they use their credit card. And what happens is the rates on the credit card, so if you don't pay off your bill, are extremely high. So you pay interest on the money that you weren't able to pay back, which is a really dangerous thing. If you get into that situation, it can be very difficult to get out of. So it's always, at least the way I was raised, it was credit is important and a good thing, but something that should be viewed with respect, and be careful not to get yourself in a really bad situation. Don't overspend if possible. Of course, people get in situations where they don't have any other options. But yeah, the wisdom I was always brought up with was avoid that at all costs.
Yeah, and that's a pretty big cultural and I think just like mindset difference between Germany and the US. And just when you said that too, I felt like maybe some Germans don't even know about these things, but we sometimes watch these American movies where people like shopaholics or whatever will come and they'll have all these credit cards and they'll have all this credit card debt, like Schulden. And that's where that comes from. Like, I feel like as a kid, I never really understood how that even works. Like, why do you need different credit cards? But it's like, the more credit cards you have a credit card limit on every single card. So then the limit adds up. So
you have a higher spending potential.
Exactly. So then if the one credit card limit is maxed out, you can just use the other credit card because they don't necessarily communicate with each other at that point. I think it would take a long time for them to like lower down your limit if they do that at all.
I don't even know if they actually do lower your limit. I'm not sure.
Probably not, because they're profiting off the interest that you're paying to them if you don't pay your credit cards off. So, yeah, I mean, basically it works like an actual loan. If you take out a loan, you also pay interest, Zinsen, on that money that you're borrowing, and it's the same with a credit card. But the mindset difference that I was talking about is that I feel like in Germany, that's almost like unthinkable, not a common thing at all to spend money that you don't have. And that's just something I think that Germans are big on in other areas of life too. We earn things first, and then we buy what we have earned, what we have. Exactly, what we have the money for. And you don't buy things that you can't afford, usually. I mean, there is, as I said, like, credit cards do exist in Germany, and people do take out credits for big things like cars, for example, houses. But I don't know that many people who have a credit on a car, for example. It's more common that you save up your money until you can afford that car. And that's just that mindset that I came to the US with. I was like, why do I need a credit card? I'm not like, I'll just use my money that I have. Like, why would I even need to do this? So I didn't have a credit, like an American credit card in the beginning. And also, I wasn't planning on staying in the US. I had heard people tell me, hey, you need to get a credit card to build a credit score. And I was like, what for? I'm going to go back home in half a year.
Yeah.
So I didn't do that. And it kind of bit me in the ass later on because your credit score is this number that we had just mentioned that basically is supposed to reflect how responsible of a spender you are, like how much a credit institution can trust you, I guess, right? So, and yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just was going to say there's some huge advantages to having a good credit score. I mean, if you're going to need credit, so a home loan, a car loan, whatever it may be, if you have a good credit score, your the interest rate that the financial institution will offer you is most likely going to be significantly lower than someone who has a worse credit score. Another thing that's interesting, I think, about the credit score is that it's used in contexts outside of just borrowing money.
That's what I was gonna say because I don't borrow money really in the U.S. and I did not expect that my credit score would matter in the situations where it suddenly mattered, like my car insurance, for example.
Car insurance is an important one. The one that came to my mind is oftentimes, or I think pretty much always, when you're renting a property, they do a credit score check as well.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's still that trust that they need to have with you to see how responsible you are.
That you pay the rent every month.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was going to bring me to a question that I kind of had for you or just wanted to throw out into this discussion was the Schufa Auskunft. Is kind of similar to that in the sense of it's what's required oftentimes when you're wanting to rent a property, which obviously I didn't have before moving to Germany. So it's just interesting when you change systems, you come across these things that don't exist in the other.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of in this like no man's land because the people who developed these systems didn't think of foreigners coming in and trying to jump in halfway through the process rather than growing up with them.
Yeah. So the Schufa-Auskunft, as you said, is kind of the German equivalent to the American credit score, but it's also not because, first of all, it works differently, and second of all, it's really not that important. Like, it really mostly matters if you rent a place, which you have gone through that process recently. So, like, if you, especially in a city like Munich, where there's so many applicants for one apartment, your credit score, your Schufa-Auskunft, kind of plays a big role in that.
Yeah.
And if you don't provide that, I think you have to provide that yourself, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, you normally have to pay for it yourself.
Yeah, which in the U.S. they just request it with
exactly.
What's it called? The different.
I think there are three large. I forget the names of them. Three large credit. There's the Equifax.
Yeah.
There's
TransUnion. Is that one?
I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so out of the American system. It's crazy because I used to know these by heart.
I don't know the third one because I have this app, Credit Karma, and I think it only shows me those two.
And I think it's each year you can look at your credit score once with
each
provider.
You can now, with these new apps that I think are a pretty new thing, like Credit Karma, a few other ones, you can always look at your credit score.
But I think those are estimates as opposed to it being your actual credit score. I think you can look at your actual credit score from these institutions once a year per institution, so 3 times a year. But then like the Credit Karma apps, I think they do an approximation.
I don't know how it works. That's possible. The crazy thing is, if you want to look into your credit score, it'll lower your credit score. Like
really
requesting, or if someone else requests your credit score, or if you request your credit score from those institutions,
Yep.
your points will go down just because of that, which is such a weird concept.
And the credit score is somewhat of a mystery here in the U.S. because you can have a credit card, but if you don't spend on that credit card, it can actually lower your credit score. So you have to like find the sweet spot of spending but not spending too much. To be able to get a good credit score.
So the big thing that blew my mind and that I think is weird about this country and kind of shows that the financial system is a little fucked up and like how this is just such a consumption country and all these systems that are in place are there to get people to spend money and to go into debt.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not very consumer friendly in that way. Like, of course, it's great because you can spend money that you don't necessarily have and you can enjoy your life more.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's really, as you said earlier, it's kind of tricking people into being in a bad financial situation. And what I think is the fucked up thing about this is that the American credit score, you don't have one until you go into debt. So you have to go into debt to build a credit score in order to basically get loans in the future or even for your car insurance, things like that. When I came to the US, I didn't have a credit score, and that was bad for me. So I was here. I never went into debt. I didn't have a credit card. There wasn't my credit score didn't exist. So, for example, as I said, I wasn't aware that for my car insurance that would matter, because why would it?
Yeah.
I've always paid my utility bills and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But apparently that didn't really make a big difference for that. I know it kind of plays into that, but I think not enough for there to be a credit score about me at all. And then not having a credit score is a bad thing. Whereas in Germany, your Schufa-Auskunft, it basically starts at 100% because you haven't done anything wrong yet. And then if you do things wrong over time, like you pay bills late or I don't even know which things exactly play into that, but it's the other way around. You start at the full trust, and then if you show behavior that shows that you're not a responsible spender, then your score will go down.
Yeah.
It's the other way in the US. You have to spend money on your credit card to build that score. And that's when I finally ended up getting a credit card. And I literally only spent money on that in order to build that score. I got a second credit card too, because the more credit cards you have, the faster it works. And then what you said with that sweet spot, I looked that up. I got some advice from other expats how to build that the fastest. And from what I've heard and what worked for me really well, because I do have a really high credit score now, and I had that pretty quickly, is to spend about 10% of your credit card limit every month and pay it off as soon as possible.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of getting into what I wanted to mention also about the whole credit card craziness, is if you are responsible, you can game the system and get free stuff. So the credit cards, as opposed to debit cards, offer a lot of perks for spending. So if you spend a lot, you can get a lot what people call points, or the system's called points.
Or cashback, or miles.
Exactly.
So
you can get a lot of discounts in other areas. So there are some people and some websites that take it to the extreme of you have to have this card. People have different cards and use different cards depending on how many points they can get back. So they'll have a card just for eating out because they know that they get really good benefits for eating out. Spending money at restaurants or on food at grocery stores and whatnot. And then they'll have other credit cards for travel because they get really good points when they use their cards on travel. So people really game the system, and it can be really beneficial if you are responsible, but it can get out of hand if you really don't have a good grasp on what's going on.
I actually just started to get more into that because I've had a couple credit cards now for 2 years or something to build my credit score, as I said. And they did have some cash back, but I think that's the German in me. I naturally always get suspicious when it's cash back because I'm well, how much is it €5 a year? Well, then I don't need it. I don't need to give you my information for €5 a year. What's the
cost-benefit analysis?
Exactly, the Preis-Leistungs-Verhältnis there. Is this just a trick to get me into spending money that I wouldn't spend otherwise? Like a sale on a website, for example, where they're oh, it's 50% off, and then that gets you into, oh, shit, it's only 24 hours, 50% off. I have to spend a lot of money now. Whereas in reality, this isn't always the case, of course, but in a lot of cases, websites just make up a higher price that was never the actual price anyways, just to get you to think that you're getting a discount now.
I would refer you to the conversation that we had with my high school German teacher, Frau König, Christine König, when we talked about the sales at Kohl's. There's always a sales at Kohl's, which means that the prices are automatically inflated so that they can sell them at a quote-unquote discounted price.
But it's actually their normal price. They just make you think that it's a discount. So those things have always made me suspicious a little bit because that's just how I was raised. As I said, I think that's partly the German mentality, also definitely my parents' mentality, where it's well, are you really saving money on a sale if you're spending or if you're buying things that you never needed in the first place? No, you didn't save anything, you spent money.
Exactly.
That's kind of how I grew up, and that's why I was always a little bit suspicious about those whole cashback and these things. But recently, especially because I'm currently kind of spending more money because I have this house now and there's a lot going on in the house, like furniture and renovations. I actually am doing what you just said. I recently got 2 more credit cards, and I sat down for 2 hours and I made this whole list in my phone where it's okay, so for groceries I have to use this credit card. For restaurants, I use this credit card. For gas, I use this one, so that I have it all in a list and I know every time which one to use. So I'm kind of doing what you said now. I've kind of become Americanized in that
Which
sense.
I don't think is a bad thing.
No,
I think
if I spent the money anyways, it's
exactly,
not a bad thing. Yeah.
exactly. That's where the line. That's an important line to delineate.
Yeah. If you only spent the money to get the cash back, then that's kind of questionable.
Exactly. One thing I was going to say, though, and you kind of touched on this, just like your German upbringing, I think with the American upbringing, you were surrounded by debt constantly. And it's something that is just so normal. And I'm just thinking, like, the commercials that I saw for financial institutions or car loans, talking about interest rates, like you grow up with that around you, and I don't think you really realize the impact that it has on the way that you view finances. I mean, even if you think about, and I think this is something that you probably have on your list as well, student loans.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's something that you grow up with that is so normal because that's just what everyone has. And if you grow up like in Germany, where that's not as much a thing, really not a thing at all, it's hard to understand because you have two completely different worlds, completely different cultural backgrounds that really influence the way that you see the world and see finances.
Yeah, two of those big things are definitely education. It's just so insanely expensive that a normal person can't afford it. It's just impossible. So either you get like the best scholarships there are, but you can't even get those for every university, or like most people have it, they have student loans or their family is super rich. The other big thing is the health system.
Yeah.
How like if you get sick, if you get cancer, or if you need a big surgery, you're pretty screwed because it's going to be, I mean, either you have really good health insurance, but even then, for most health insurance plans in the US, you have to have a copay, deductible. So you're still going to look at pretty high bills. And if you don't have good health insurance, you might look at like tens of thousands or easily hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're like, if you have a bigger disease like cancer or something like that.
Yeah.
So I feel like those two factors in the American society, everyday life, play a big role there because you're just like exposed to having to spend these huge amounts of money. Whereas in Germany, education is free and healthcare is pretty affordable. And usually like everyone has health insurance.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily free. You still pay for it in some way, but it's much cheaper and it's also it covers everything. There's
Exactly.
no like
I was going
copays
to say
and
you
stuff
don't
like that.
you don't pay for it, but I mean, you get a card, and you go to your healthcare provider, and you just give them your card, and that's it. Like,
Yeah, and everything's covered.
don't-
You never see a bill.
Exactly. You never see a bill. Unless you go to a dentist and get it to cleaning. I just recently had
Some
that.
things aren't
some
covered,
things
yeah.
aren't covered, but the majority of things are.
Yeah.
It just was funny that I went to the dentist in Germany for the first time, and they charged me for my cleaning, which they told me that the cleaning was going to cost something. I just thought it was funny that they charged me per tooth. Like
I've never seen
it
that.
had the names of the teeth listed out,
Oh my God.
and these are the teeth
Yeah.
that we cleaned, and it was
Yeah.
like however much per tooth.
But it's still cheap in Germany, though, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
my
I've seen
my
bills
cleaning was
before.
100
Yeah.
euros.
So whereas like in the US, if you see a health bill like for a doctor's visit, it's easily like 1,000 for the doctor to show up, 2,000 for the X-ray, or even more. I don't even know how much an X-ray costs.
Yeah.
2,000 for the ambulance to come, which like a Krankenwagen ambulance in Germany is free. Like
Yeah.
of course it's free. Here people don't want to call the ambulance because they can't afford it. It's ridiculous. But that's a little bit off track. I
Yes,
just
back
wanted
to
to say like
finances.
you kind of grow up with these like big numbers, and as you said, it's so normal that people have their cars on a credit, like they pay off their cars. Everyone pretty much pays off their houses, of course. They have a mortgage on their house,
Yeah.
which just a lot of people in the US do own houses. That's a whole different topic, but Germany is more of a renter's country, whereas the US is more of a homeowners country. And then student loans, which like it's so common for people in their 20s after they graduate college to have over $100,000 in student loan debts,
Yeah.
which means that then they have to find a good job and they're kind of in this like they're under pressure
Yeah.
to find a good paying job so that they can pay that off.
Exactly. I was going to say, I can specifically remember, actually, it was with your family. Like you said, like we've been saying, when you grow up with these things, like they're normal. And then when you're exposed to an environment where that's not normal, it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
I specifically remember I was with, I think, your parents. I don't think you were there.
Okay.
And we were going on a walk, and I was just talking to them about, like, I was just out of college, just recently started my new job, talking about, like, my financial dreams for myself. and they were like, oh my gosh, like that must be so hard to start off like right out of college and have this money that you have to pay back.
Yeah.
I was like, it's just kind of normal in the US. But then it got me thinking like, oh my gosh, the Germans, when they're done with university, like they don't have debt.
No.
Like they can take their time to go travel, or there's not like this pressure of, okay, you're done with college, now you have to start working right away so you can pay off your loans and get done with your loans as soon as possible so that you can pay for a mortgage. Like there's not all of that financial pressure on you. And it's just, it was, for me, it just was kind of, not an aha moment, but it just was like a, whoa. There are different ways of dealing with life than what we do in the US.
Yeah, and then coming from that to this country, I still feel weird about being in debt, and I'm not in debt, and I've never been in debt. Like all the credit cards that I'm using, I pay those off right away because I still, maybe I'm going to be in that situation at one point, but currently, luckily, I don't have to be in that situation. I don't want to spend money that I don't have.
Yeah.
I'd rather just not get those things then, or not treat myself to something if I can't actually afford it. That's just really the German in me. With you, though, you were pretty, like, German or just very responsible with your student loans because you paid those off quickly.
I did, and that's what I was going to say is I felt like the pressure of, like, oh my gosh, I have these loans. And I mean, I was really lucky with what I came out of university with. My parents helped me pay for some of my college, and I think I had a little bit more than $30,000 in debt when
which is low.
Which is really low for American standards. And I was lucky to find a very good paying job out of college, and I just
And you always worked during college
yeah,
too. You
exactly.
did, like, internships and stuff.
And I got like really into finances and like had a really good budget, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to continue to live like a student. Even though I have like this bigger paycheck coming in now, but I'm not going to change my lifestyle and just pay everything off as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And I was luckily able to do that really quickly and get kind of on the level playing field with the Europeans, if you will.
Yeah.
But for me, in my personal situation, it was more important to get the financial freedom of not having that debt hanging over me.
Yeah.
And then make decisions from there, as opposed to just paying like them. A lot of people will just pay the minimum payment back that they owe the financial institution. But then it takes a really long time, and then you're paying more in interest over time.
Exactly. That's the thing. You're going to end up paying more.
Exactly. So for me, it just was a huge motivating factor to pay that back as quickly as possible. But I totally get that that's not possible in everyone's circumstances.
Yeah.
So that's what I was saying kind of at the beginning was my German approach was like, okay, I have like this chunk of money that I owe. I need to get rid of this ASAP.
Yeah.
Which I don't feel is necessarily always the general American mentality.
No, and that's like I looked into the numbers and like before we started recording, and I don't think you can like one-to-one compare these numbers because I just like looked up different statistics, and I don't know how they got these statistics in the both cases and what they even counted as debt or credit in those both cases and who they asked and those kinds of things. You know, like statistics, if they weren't like conducted by the same institution with the same method, aren't always comparable perfectly.
Yeah.
But what I did find, and I think what from my personal experience seems about right, is that for 2020 in Germany, 15% of all Germans had a Kredit, so a credit,
Some
a
sort
loan.
of credit, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, and it didn't have a year for this, but it said about 80% of all Americans are in debt. So as I said, I'm not quite sure if you can compare that one-to-one, but it feels about right because debt would also be like credit card debt, student loans, mortgage, car payments, all those things.
I totally agree just as far as like my gut feeling about those numbers. It feels about right.
Yeah.
But one thing that I just wanted to make a clear distinction, the difference between being in debt and having a line of credit, you know? If you have a credit card, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're in debt. You have access to be in debt. So I'm wondering with this 80%, is it truly people? Does it say in debt?
In debt, yeah. I wrote it down the way that I found it.
Yeah.
So basically, maybe meaning that they haven't paid off all their credit card bills at this moment in time.
Yeah, then that would make sense. But yeah, it's just a completely different approach.
Yeah,
and like for me, what was really crazy, and when I see some of my American friends, is I know they have student loans, and then they go out and buy it. They finance a really nice car.
Yeah.
And then they'll buy a house. They'll finance a house. I'm like, you guys have so much debt. How are you not freaking out about your finances right now? But I understand that that's just their mode of what would you say? modus operandi, their mode of operation. And wow, I sounded so pretentious right there. I would get so much shit for my family for that. But I get that that's just, it's different approaches to finances, and I'm not saying that necessarily one is better than the other as long as people are still able to meet their financial goals. But it's really interesting to see how people, when I look at myself and how uncomfortable I would be with that situation, how comfortable a lot of Americans are with just having large sums of money that they owe.
That's exactly how I feel as a German. It's like, it makes me feel uncomfortable or like stressed to see other people spend money that they don't have. And one other statistic, I didn't actually look that up. I'm going to put a link maybe in the show notes and info box because I don't want to quote it wrong. But I do remember it was something along the lines of, so don't take me literally here, but that I believe it was more than half of all Americans, there was a survey, more than half of all Americans cannot pay or wouldn't be able to pay a $400 bill that they didn't expect. Like, for example, if their car needs a repair or something, like they don't have $400 saved up. And just the amount of Americans that live paycheck to paycheck, which is so much more common than I ever thought. Like, to me, paycheck to paycheck as a German just always meant like, oh, like poor people, like they're like more on the in the lower social classes, which like is obviously not always the people's fault. In most cases, it isn't their fault. But no, here, a lot of people, even in more like the middle class, live paycheck to paycheck, even though they make decent money, which to me was just so mind-blowing when I first came here. So that's just also like kind of reflects what we just said, how common that is in the US to just be in debt and be okay with it, how normal that is. And one interesting thing that I heard about this topic recently in a video of another YouTuber called Leben USA. He makes YouTube videos in German. He's a German who lives in LA. He talked about this exact topic, and he phrased this in a way that I personally hadn't looked at it before, and I find this very interesting. He said that the difference between the German mentality and the American mentality is kind of like, would you rather wait to live or live now and take that in kauf, take that into account, or take that sacrifice of being in debt in return. And that is very interesting because like why would you, like if you think about it, why would you wait to live a good life if you could do it now with all that credit you get from people? Why would you wait 30 years to afford a nice car and a nice house if you could just have that now? You never know how long you live. And like that kind of gave me a whole different view on this whole topic because I was always like, why do people do this? This is so irresponsible. And like, why wouldn't you like wait until you have earned it? But at the same time, it's like, honestly, maybe they're not that dumb because they are enjoying their life. So yeah, thanks to him for pointing that out. That was just a very eye-opening statement to me.
I think it's an interesting statement. I agree with the statement itself. Like that is a legitimate perspective. Yeah. But still, I'm too German or too conservative when it comes to finances. But back to your statistic of like that's a legitimate thing. Like
with the $400.
Yes, like that's a huge problem here in the U.S. And that when I got started with my financial journey, if you will, when I got out of college and was trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I handle this situation? I got really into a guy called Dave Ramsey, which
don't know him.
A lot of Americans have heard to him before. He's
I know Gordon Ramsay.
He's a very boisterous, opinionated financial person. He had a radio show. But I followed a lot of his they call baby steps to financial success. And the first thing that he teaches you to do is have an emergency fund of $1,000. Because exactly that statistic that you said, most people can't afford a $400 emergency.
And that's also just a big cultural difference. I feel like in Germany, that's built into our genes. Like we need to have an emergency fund. Everyone, even the poorer people, don't spend all their money, I feel like. And I'm not trying to like just generalize everyone, but I mean, that statistic doesn't apply to Germany. Germany is a big saving country. Like Germans, I think a lot of Germans get more joy out of saving than out of spending money. And that's just something that is natural to us. I feel like no financial advisor would have to tell us that. That's just like, we would freak out if we didn't have that safety net. Just, I think, goes along with the whole planning mentality of Germans. We're just big planners.
And I also wonder, and this is kind of getting into history, and this is just my speculation, but I mean, the U.S. hasn't had a war in its country and been in an unstable situation as far as like really acute needs in a very long time, as opposed to Germany with its relatively recent past of having war and really financial and, I mean, so much turmoil within
Food
the country.
stamps, poverty.
Exactly. That it would make sense culturally that Americans are going to be a little bit more frivolous in their spending because they haven't generationally seen the effects of not having savings, as opposed to Germany, where your grandparents were probably like, okay, based off of this, we really, really have to save. And I look back at like my grandparents and the way that they were raised, because their parents experienced the Great Depression in the U.S. They're much more frugal and much more conservative when it comes to their spending. So it's just interesting to see the cultural, really try to understand where it comes from, you know?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like just historically, the U.S. has been this country, like the new world, so many resources, so much land. People didn't have to, what's the word? Sich untergeben. So they didn't have to have a like supervisor or landlord anymore. They could just come here, have their own, suddenly own their own land that they weren't able to own back in Europe. And there is still so much space in this country and so many possibilities. I mean, it is the land of opportunities after all. And I feel like you can definitely see that in people's behavior. But the war thing definitely plays a role there too. All my grandparents lived through the war. They're not alive anymore. But for example, they all lived through poverty, obviously. And then they had the like Wirtschaftswunder shortly after the war where like the economy bloomed again in Germany. But I feel like even with that happening, they kind of stuck to that mentality that we still have in Germany nowadays. It's like, is it necessary? Do you need it?
Yeah.
And that's always, I've often been called like humble by Americans because I would say no to things if I was offered something for free because I felt like, well, but I don't need it. I'm not thirsty. I'm good. Like, I don't need a free drink right now. And I feel like that's a very un-American thing to say no to something free. Or at least that's what people were like surprised always when I said no to something. But we definitely still have that mentality of like, do you really need it?
Yeah.
Is it necessary? Could you maybe spend that money on something else? Germans also really like to travel. So I feel like in a lot of cases, a lot of Germans prefer saving up their money for trips more than for materialistic things in the moment. We're definitely big planners with those things. Like we think about what are we going to spend this money on in the future. Whereas I feel like Americans are a lot more in the moment, which can also be good, but maybe with finances also sometimes kind of be a disadvantage. But for example, my grandma, I only met one of my grandparents, and her favorite food up until she died was potatoes with butter, which is a very simple food, but because they didn't have a lot of food throughout World War II, and if there was butter, it was a good day. Like, that was like the highest of emotions that they would have. So like, I do feel like what you just said definitely plays a role there.
Yeah, and I mean, just to tell, I think we're starting to wrap up here, but just to tell one other little anecdote about my grandma, she has, I think it's called a darning ball.
I do not know what that is.
Is used, so I don't ask me what darning is. I learned it from her, the word from her, because it's just like this little wooden ball that you put in a sock so that you can mend the sock.
Okay,
like, fix the sock.
Okay, yeah. I've seen that, yeah.
For me as an American, having grown up when I did in the US, like the idea, I mean, I think for most of Europe too, you're like, you're going to sit there and fix the sock? Like,
no, I feel like that's still, I mean, not everyone does that anymore in Germany, but I feel like a lot of grandparents still do that in Germany nowadays. Yeah.
I'm like, wow, you're taking the time to fix a sock.
But overall, though, and that has also stuck in Germany, we're definitely much less of a wasteful country. And like, even my parents, and they didn't live through the war themselves, but their parents did, still try to not waste something. They'd rather repair things than throw it away. And I think you can also a little bit see that in the whole like German quality reputation of like, how German products usually last longer, because that's something that Germans really appreciate when they're willing to spend more money on something if they know that it's gonna last long. Whereas I feel like in the US it's much more common to throw something out, even if it's still perfectly good, or just a little bit broken, if financially, economically, it makes more sense to buy it new. Like if the new purchase is overall cheaper than the repair, they'll just do that. Whereas I feel like, probably not every German, of course, but I feel like a lot of Germans just like kind of in their hearts, like their mentality is like they'd rather fix it.
Yeah.
And rather buy something that doesn't even need that many repairs than buying it new, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast, but I know I've mentioned it with you. I think of when I bought an iron for the first time in Germany. Like, I was so surprised by how expensive the irons were. But I mean, people buy irons for for their life.
Yeah.
Whereas I was just looking for an iron for 3 months.
Yeah.
You know, like it just, for me, that's when it became real. What you were saying is like, okay, it seems like this country likes to buy high quality things that will last.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like here in the US, we tend to be more okay with something that's lower quality and gets the job done for now.
I would get my like parents or grandparents vacuum when I moved out. Like those are being handed down until they break, kind of.
Yeah, I mean that has happened with me and my family as well here.
Okay.
But yeah.
That was just the one thing that came to mind with like the iron. Yeah. Definitely also probably changing a little bit in Germany with the whole quality thing. But I think overall you can just kind of see that mentality in different parts of life in Germany versus the US. But I feel like we've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. Credit score, mortgages, student loans, credit cards. The only thing that we haven't covered, but that's like we already talked about it, is checks. I just wanted to mention that. We did talk about that in the...
We have talked about that one before.
In I think, the second episode about Adulting 2.0. Yeah. So while Germany is so big on cash still and credit cards are becoming more common, but still not as common as in the US, where like you can literally pay with your card for even 50 cents. Purchase, like even if it's just a pack of gums or something like that. You can always pay with card usually. But at the same time, and you can also use Apple Pay almost everywhere, I feel like, these days. But at the same time, checks are a thing. Paper checks were like, when I came here and I opened up my first bank account, I got a checkbook.
I love how much this triggers you.
It's not a trigger. It's just this like, it doesn't really trigger me in a way, because the crazy thing about the American banking system is that sometimes checks are actually more practical than wiring money. I'm not going to get into that because I feel like I've complained about that on a lot of different occasions. But yeah, the whole thing with checks, it was weird because I came here on my exchange semester. I did not realize this about the US before because I feel like it was just not really talked about in pop culture. And then suddenly I had to pay my rent as a check. And I was like, I don't have a bank account. I don't have a check. I haven't seen a check in my life. I don't know what a check looks like. I knew it from movies like Catch Me If You Can. And like they used to exist in Germany like back in the day. But yeah, that's a whole thing.
I remember in elementary school, they taught us how to fill out a check.
Yeah, see?
And like just one other quick thing about checks. When I worked I used to be a cashier at Target, which is just a big store here in the U.S. It was always the worst when it was normally old grandmas who would come through your line and want to pay for their groceries with a check, which you can do, but then you have to put it into like this little machine that like stamps it, and then sometimes the machine would jam. It was the worst experience. That was horrible when that would happen, because then also it takes forever because they have to write out everything on the check and then give it to you. Oh, it was the worst.
I know. Those times that I've talked about this topic before, there's always a lot of people commenting like, I haven't seen a check since the 80s. What are you talking about? Checks aren't a thing in the US. And it's well, good for you, but they are a thing. Like, maybe it's bigger in the Midwest than it is on the coast. I could definitely see that. But I personally have never paid for groceries with a check, which I think a lot of people assume when I say that. But for example, rent, big payments. Yeah. If you're a freelancer, being paid by people, like how they pay their contractors. So yeah, the amount of times that I had to cash a check, which luckily in a lot of cases works on your phone nowadays, or you could just go to the ATM. and just deposit it into your bank account. It's not that complicated anymore, but it's still another step that you have to take over just having that money deposited to your account. So the amount of times that I had to do that, I think speaks for itself. Like, I've only been here for 5 years, and I know how to do these things. I have a checkbook. I know how to fill out a check. I've deposited many, many checks throughout these 5 years. So yeah, that's just the last point that I had on my list regarding money and payments.
Yeah, I feel like we've done I was going to say, I feel like we've done a good job. I'm proud of us, Faylee.
And we're only at like an hour, so good job, us.
And I feel like we won't have to edit too much of this. I am proud of ourselves.
I think we really deserved a Guinness now. We can
exactly.
go out.
I think we've earned the Guinness to celebrate St. Patrick's Day now. But yeah, we hope that you guys enjoy this episode, kind of hearing our insights and our personal experiences with the topic of finances in both countries. If you think that we missed some sort of or some topic that you want us to talk about in the future, feel free to let us know. You can leave a comment in the YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment in the comments section. We also have a couple other ways that you can reach out to us. I don't know, Faylee, do you have anything else you want to add before we jump into our standard text?
No, just wanted to say, like, share your experiences with this topic. Also, if you're from another country, because I know we have a lot of listeners and viewers from other countries that are not the US or Germany, like, let us know what it's like in your country. Is it more like the American style or more the German style?
Or maybe there's a completely third one. Maybe it's not a dichotomy, but rather there could be some sort of completely different way of viewing things. So please let us know, because I would be really interested in
Me too. This is
that.
a very fascinating topic, especially because it plays a role every single day in your life, I feel like.
Definitely.
So yeah, thank you guys for watching. And the other ways that you mentioned to reach out to us are via email, understandingtrainstation@gmail.com. Send us a DM on Instagram, understandingtrainstation. Those are the things to reach out to us. And then if you want to support us...
Talking about finance.
Yeah, exactly. Our finances. If you want to support us, you can do so on patreon.com/understandingtrainstation. And then if you become a Patreon supporter, you can also reach out to us on there. And you can talk to us in our monthly Google Hangout sessions. It's like a video chat situation, so you can just ask us questions, share your experiences. And if you want to just support us with a little tip, you can just do so on buymeacoffee.com/UTS podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching, listening, and supporting us. Of course, also hit that subscribe button, the thumbs up on YouTube, give us a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Follow us on those platforms as well. And with that, we'll be back in 2 weeks.
See you then.